in my quest to find the best wide-angle lens for me, I recently rented two of Sony's native wide-angle lenses, including this one right here, the Sony 12-24 f4G. Now, there are only a few 12mm lenses out there for the Sony system, but with the few that are out there, I'm pretty sure that there are a lot of people who are curious about just how much you can actually fit into the frame with a 12mm lens. So in this video, we're going to go ahead and take a look at that as well as other aspects of this lens. And in the end, I'll give you my opinion as a beginner photographer on whether this is a good lens to check out or pick up or maybe rent. So first off, the weight of this lens kind of surprised me. I actually thought that it would be way heavier than it is. And I'm not saying that it's the lightest thing out there, of course, but I definitely think it's doable to hold it with one hand for extended periods of time. The design is very simple and straightforward with that classic Sony plastic shell that doesn't feel cheap or bad at all, but still actually makes you question why this lens costs so much if they're using it as the material of choice. Now, I have seen information stating that this lens is weather sealed, however, I don't see a gasket here on the mount. What also makes that weather sealing comment very, very questionable is the fact that there is some space underneath the lens where it zooms in and out, and albeit this space is extremely tight, there is still room for things to get in there, and I checked, believe me. This lens has 4 control points in the form of an autofocus / manual focus toggle switch on the bottom left side, a customizable button here that is set to hold focus by default, a rubber and more than large enough zoom ring that has a favorable amount of resistance to it for making very, very precise adjustments if you feel to do so. And up front here, you have your focus ring, which is also made of rubber and is also fairly large. This ring does turn a bit more loose, but it is also good for making fine adjustments as long as you do take your time. Now, unlike other common lenses out there, this one does not come with a detachable lens hood, so you're going to want to be very, very, very careful with how you take care of it, since any damage to this hood will be permanent. It can be replaced apparently, but when I looked into it, this part alone was about $67. Also, unlike other common lenses, this one cannot use a front filter at all since you have this protruding glass element here. A company by the name of Haida does make rear filters for this, but it requires some screwdriver work to go ahead and put on their bracket for these specific filters. When it comes to the field of view you can get with this lens, it's either going to be a whooping 122 degrees at the widest end or 84 degrees at the 24mm end. When used with an APS-C size sensor, you get a 99-degree field of view, which on the widest end equates to 18mm. At the longer end, you get a 61-degree field of view, which is equivalent to about a 36mm. This lens does not feature any sort of stabilization in it, so you will have to rely on IBIS, a good old tripod, or the gyro data, which you can then use to stabilize your footage in Sony's Catalyst Browse or whatever software you choose to use. With the original MSRP on the unit, I'm really surprised that Sony didn't opt for OSS in this lens. I understand that most of their newer bodies have stabilization built in, but there are bodies out there like the ZV-E10 that don't have that built in. It also doesn't hurt having extra stabilization to synchronize with the IBIS in the camera body, so I really think they should have gone for it and opted for it, especially with what they're asking for this lens. The autofocus performance is definitely good here. It's definitely good. I don't recall there ever being a time where this lens didn't catch focus very quickly, and the focus motors in here were extremely quiet to the point where you'd really need to be in like a creepy, quiet forest at night to hear anything going on with them, and even still, it would be pretty hard. This should come as good news to people who do videography or just take videos, I guess. If you're not a videographer, you're just taking videos. Before we go ahead and move on with this review, I do want to take some time to shout out the company that actually made this review possible, and that is lensrentals.com. This video isn't sponsored by them, but they did make it possible for me to try out these lenses and share my experiences with you. Lensrentals.com is as straightforward as it sounds. You can pretty much rent any kind of camera equipment on the market, even drones, which is another one of my favorite kinds of cameras. Another cool thing is that they have their Keeper program, which allows you to purchase almost any equipment you've rented. They'll even take 7 days of the rental fees off of the final buyout price. If that's not enough, they even have a rewards program that allows you to gain points off of your current rental and use those points towards your next one. Overall, using lensrentals.com is a great way to check out that equipment you had your eye on for a while but really wanted to get some hands-on time with before you make your final decision. If you're interested in taking that lens you've been looking at for a spin, head over to lensrentals.com and use the discount code W.I.H to get 15% off your first order. Now let's go ahead and take a look at some real-world samples to give you even more of an idea of what you can actually do with a lens like this. After that's done, I'll talk about some things I like about this lens and things I don't like about this lens. Unfortunately, the pictures you're about to see are in JPEG format since for some reason both of my video editors on my tablet wouldn't display the full resolution of the pictures in RAW format. Also, if you're expecting an in-depth breakdown of certain characteristics of this lens, I won't be talking or going over that stuff since there are already a plethora of reviews out there that cover it. However, I will say that some of the photos you're about to see may provide answers to questions like what kind of bokeh you can get, as well as how this lens handles flaring. So let's go ahead and get into those samples. So hopefully those samples gave you a general idea of some of the characteristics of this lens. Now, I am not opposed to making another video that specifically details things like sharpness, chromatic aberration, distortion, and things of that sort. But since this video is already long enough and there are plenty of other videos out there that could do that way better than I can, I decided to leave that stuff out. Let me know in the comments though if you do want to see a separate video on that stuff, and if this video gets enough views and if people are interested in these things, I'll definitely go ahead and make an in-depth video on those characteristics. Now, with all of that stuff being said, let's go ahead and move on to my likes and dislikes with this lens, starting with the likes. So the first thing I do like is pretty much the versatility you get in reference to the range you have with this lens. Having an ultra-wide angle length like 12 millimeters is great, but sometimes you really just want to get closer to things, and being able to move up to 24 millimeters is definitely handy and makes it so that I don't have to change out my lenses as frequently. This is in comparison to having something like a 12 millimeter prime, which only gives you the option to shoot at that wide angle and nothing else. At least with 12 to 24 millimeters, you have a better chance of really not having to go ahead and switch out your lens, is what I'm trying to get at. The second thing that I like is that the zoom happens internally. It wouldn't really particularly bother me if it didn't, but it does definitely help, especially when I'm in a really tight space or when I'm using this lens in different weather conditions like snow, since I don't really have to worry about moisture getting on something that does extend out. The last thing I like is just overall the ergonomics of this lens. At least I think I can call it that. Everything from just the weight to how well dampened and spaced out the zoom ring and focus rings are just makes this very easy to use without looking, which is perfect for those times when you have your eyes stuck in your EVF. Now, moving on to things I don't particularly like, or what I'm not a fan of, I guess, is that I'd start with the fact that this lens hood being permanent is not something that makes me happy. Before putting this review out, I purchased a copy of this lens, and you can see here that it came with some damage to the hood. This hood can be replaced, but it's difficult to do so on your own and requires you to send your lens to Sony's only repair center in the country, or go out and find a camera store that you trust to actually repair it. The second thing is that I do wish that Sony added stabilization to this lens. I understand that with such a wide angle you most likely wouldn't need it, and I do understand that there is IBIS built into bodies like the Sony a7 IV, which in my opinion, it does leave much to be desired, but this is a zoom lens and it does go to 24 millimeters, and that's when it would definitely come in handy. I also don't think this would have been too much to ask, especially given what the MSRP on this lens is. The last thing is not necessarily something I don't like about the lens, but something that I think Sony could have done given its asking price, and that is include an aperture ring. Given that the MSRP of this lens is near the 2000s, I can't see that this would have been something that would have been too hard for them to add. Other than all of these things here, I'd say that this is definitely an unexpected favorite lens of mine. You could probably tell from the pictures, but I live in an area where there are tons of landscape photo opportunities, and I really wanted a lens that would allow me to capture as much of those landscapes as I could. Needless to say, this lens allowed me to do that, which is exactly why I purchased the copy for myself. With the 12 to 24 range, I think that this is a lens that's a bit more versatile, which also adds value for me, with the 24 millimeter being one of the more common focal lengths you'd see on something like a smartphone. This pretty much makes this lens just overall an inexpensive addition to all of the lenses I own. Again, it's definitely not the widest out there, but I feel like it's the most well-balanced for Sony's ecosystem in terms of everything it does have to offer. Alright, so that is pretty much all I have to say about the Sony 12 to 24 f4G ultra wide lens here. I probably extended that title way more than I should have, but overall I do hope that there was something in this review that helped you make a decision or helped answer a question. And like I said, if you want to see a more in-depth sort of look at the image quality characteristics, hopefully this video gets enough views for me to have incentive to do that, and as well as comments and things of that sort. But yeah, overall, I hope there was something you found helpful in this review. Thank you for watching as always, and I do appreciate it. I do appreciate the support. But with all that being said, wherever you are in the world, have a great day, a great afternoon, a great evening, or a great night, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you for watching once again.